I know that there's been a lot of things that have changed in your family right now, and that can be kind of hard. And I know that maybe you miss your parents, or maybe you feel like people don't notice you the same anymore. Maybe people are like paying a lot of attention to the new kids in your house. So that doesn't mean you're not special. They're trying to make sure those other kids feel welcome. But I know it does still hurt sometimes when people forget to acknowledge you too.
Well, hi, Daniela. We're so glad that you're here with us today, even amidst some technical difficulties that have been happening previous to this moment. We're glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here. No worries.
Okay, so I'm so excited to talk to you about not only your perspective from, your personal life, both from growing up and also now, your present life situation, family situation, but also your professional background as well really contributes so much to who you are and what you do. And so I'm really excited about that. But we wanted to start off with kind of a silly question, but I don't know. I love to be a little silly. So, so I'm going to ask you, tacos or hamburgers, and why?
Oh, man. I guess tacos, because there just feels like there's a little bit more variety with tacos than hamburgers. Hamburgers, I mean, you can get different stuff on it, but tacos just, you can get flavors across the board, I feel like, a little bit different. Maybe that's because I have some restaurants near me that have lots and lots and lots of options, but I guess I would say tacos. Yeah.
So, I'd love to know, like, what you do, how you got started with it. Like, what was the first moment where you're like, I'm going to start an organization, I'm going to start a nonprofit, or I'm going to offer these resources, and like how that has evolved.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I call myself a dabbler because I kind of do a number of things. Primarily, I say it's kind of like my steady job is I am a therapist here in Texas. So I don't own that practice. I work at a practice, a group practice. So I work with kids of all backgrounds, and also kind of specifically bio kids in foster and adoptive families. And then I did start an organization called With Siblings, and it's a business where I have developed trainings, I've developed resources for foster and adoptive families, specifically those who have kids by birth as well, because there's a gap there. But it is kind of funny how I got about to starting it, because it was one of those things where a friend of mine who was working in the field sent me a text saying, hey, my agency would like a training on this topic that is not at all related to birth kids. Would you be open to doing that? And I said, sure. So I wrote a training, I did this training, and then I realized I could do this for about bio kids, and I bet there would be an interest for it. So sure. I went back to the same agency and said, do you want this too? Later on, and they were for that. And then I had previously worked for an agency and had connections with friends at other agencies, those kinds of things. And so was realizing there was an interest there. So then I was like, well, if I'm doing this, I guess I ought to have an LLC behind it. So it's not just me and the wind doing this. So that's kind of the short of it. It wasn't like I had a dream 20 years ago to open or, to start With Siblings. It just unfolded. And that is honestly, I've been talking a lot lately, kind of the story of my life, where I have all these big dreams and plans, and those don't happen because the thing that happens is bigger and better and grander than what I had written up for myself. And this is one of those things. It's not like it was on my to-do list, but here I am and I'm loving it. So.
Oh my goodness. And it's such a wonderful resource for so many. And one of the biggest ways that, at least from an outsider's perspective, one of the biggest ways that you're able to offer content is over social media. So tell me some about how that got started.
Yeah, that was kind of the same way. It was like, okay, well, I am now doing these trainings, and I know that people everywhere need access to this, or at least to know about this. So how can I expand my reach? And that was, honestly, I don't love social media, but it's kind of a necessary evil in the world that we're in, or not evil. I don't know what your opinion is on it, but I would love if we didn't have to live in social media, but because it is the place to get further reach and to let people know about things. That's really how that started. And then from there, you know, social work, I'm a social worker. And so the advocacy piece really comes alive on social media. How can I advocate for this group of kids? How can I advocate for parents to be heard? You know, those kinds of things. And so that's really what that platform primarily, I've used it for. Although I had originally tried to keep it really just like strictly, what do we know from research? What do we know from practice? But I've realized that people really want to know my story too. And so I've tried to really incorporate a lot more of that, because those are the touchstones that people really just connect to, I think, even in a more, personal way. And so I've tried to incorporate that as well, but I just never want it to teeter to the point where people think it's all my opinion on there, because it really is so much more than just me sharing my story. So,
Well, and not only that, but also like the way that you do it. Like you have great skill in putting together posts that are dynamic and interesting and grab attention, but also are very personal. Like it's a skill set, and you're killing it.
thank you. That's so meaningful to me. So kind. Thank you.
Oh, definitely. How many followers do you have now? That's a ton.
A little over 4,000.
Okay, that's a lot. It's for what some people would say, like, oh, I never even heard of that before. You know what I
Sure.
mean?
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, hats off for that. That's a lot of work. I don't know if anyone in our audience is aware of that. That's a ton of work. just that piece. So that plus your professional life, plus being a parent, plus I'm sure a daughter and a friend and all the other things, and sibling, of course.
Yep.
In addition to that, that sounds like a really full life.
Yes. I will often talk about like the imaginary plates that I'm constantly spinning and trying to keep up.
Oh my goodness. Even more reason why we're so thankful to have this bit of time with you.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so thank you for that. So, when you think about the different relationships in your life, both as we just mentioned, being a daughter, being a sibling, being, I believe you're married, correct?
Yep.
So you're a wife, you're a mother. Which ones would you say, which roles have been the most developmental to bring you where you are today, and the way that you kind of view the world?
Wow. Okay. All of them. We'd have to look probably timeline, right? So it's like
Right.
maybe some of these aren't as impactful right now, but they sure got me where I am. But then also, right. So, let's do a quick overview, I suppose. So I grew up to parents, two younger biological brothers. When I was about 8, my parents decided, we all decided, let's dip our toes into adoption, not foster care, but adoption. So we're doing matched adoption through foster care. And there's a whole history there of basically 10 years of that. We didn't actually end up adopting. We did end up fostering. And then my parents did adopt when I was 20, getting married like 4 months later.
Wow.
So that contributed largely to who I am, the work that I do, my perspective on the world, the career, all the things that largely impacted me. My relationship with my parents has, I would say for the most part, always been strong and steady, and they've always been really supportive to me and still are. And they're still friends of mine, and I'll call them at least a few times a week and chat and talk about this cool thing that I learned when I was, studying that week or whatever. And so we have a really close relationship. Of course, my husband and I are best friends as well. And then it's, now that I'm a parent to kids by both birth and adoption, there's this other layer of things. And so what I learned as maybe a sibling to kids, in foster care or been adopted, is not the same as what I've learned as a mother, and nor are the experiences the same. And so my kids have also really largely impacted, and the experiences that my kids and I've had with my kids have largely impacted, especially how I view the world now and my faith. It's really impacted that, especially over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear more about that. So what role has your faith played in like your, development of who you are, or development of this ministry or this organization? Like, yeah, all of that.
It's so hard to articulate specifics because it's everything. It's it's the foundation of everything. And so if we start simplistically, the heart of my organization is to care for, see, and support a group of kids that are so often forgotten. And that is the heart of Jesus. And that is my heart, right? That these kids would know that even when they don't feel seen or supported, that there is a loving God who has not taken his eyes off of them. And so that is like the big picture heart of it. In fact, I wrote a children's book, and that was kind of my heart woven into it, though it's not a book that at all mentions my faith. It's woven in there because I believe that it expresses that same heart, that I've seen you. When you didn't think anyone saw you, I did. And so that's kind of the big picture of why this organization and how that relates to my faith. But even just as a parent, we have walked a very hard year and a half.
Oh.
And I mean, like, really hard. I'm not going to go into the specifics, and I know that doesn't bother you. It has been awfully hard. And the thing that has helped is my faith. I mean, I just don't know how people do the hard things without it. I've done a lot of processing, even through like writing poems or like kind of prayers. And there's one I wrote a few months ago and just keeps coming up. It's just this idea of, I didn't ask for this hard. I don't want this hard. This is not a gift. Take it back. But
Right.
then kind of coming to this point, like, why am I saying thank you then? Like, I don't want to go back to the person I was before this. So I didn't want this, but I also don't want to, like, I'm thankful for the person that I am now. And so just this wrestling of God is doing something amidst the hard, and the ways that he has shown me how present he is, and that he has never left me. And even just thinking about in 1 Samuel, where, you know, Samuel sets up this pillar, this Ebenezer, to say, thus far the Lord has helped us. And that has really been an anthem that has kind of carried me through the last year and a half or so, of just, okay, this he carried us through, this he carried us through, this he carried us through. So I can trust that whatever's up there, he's going to carry us through too. So
It's like, you know, you try to explain to someone what it is to have faith and to trust in Jesus in these moments, and it's so esoteric, but also like true and foundational at the same point. Like, it's something that I stand on, but it's like hard to pin down at the same time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you know, sometimes we bring things into our actual, you know, present day, like a marker, like even a sticky note on a mirror, you know, or something that's just like a truth, like, thus far the Lord has taken us and brought us here, and he has sustained us. Yeah, I love that story. You know, I don't know about you, but before I was a parent, I had all these ideas about what parenting was going to be. Oh, I'm not going to be a slave to nap time. Oh, I would do this. I would do that. Yeah, see? And then you are exhausted, and you're like, you know what? If my kid sleeps, then that means I can like do a load of laundry and sit down for a hot second. I am absolutely a slave to nap time. So I wonder, you know, coming out of knowing some pretty hard stories and living some hard stories throughout your childhood, teen years, and perhaps young adulthood, like, compare, if you can, like, what you used to think about the world then and now as a mom, and even in this hard season, how you view the world now.
I mean, it would go back to my faith, just in that everything. I mean, I feel fortunate to have grown up in a home where that was always a part of our family. And so from even the very beginning, when we started fostering, that was part of our why and the reason that we were even jumping in. And so that has more or less kind of stayed the same, as far as, you know, there's this need. There are these kids who need help temporarily, or, you know, or if they need a permanent family. And so we need to do something about it. And so as far as that goes, that worldview has kind of been the same since I was really young. Honestly, I can't really remember before that time. And I mean, I know 7 is 7, 8. You have memories, but enough to distinguish such a big thing. I just don't have the ability to really think that big. So I don't know. It's hard for me to say like how my worldview has changed in that time to this time. I think things have grown, right? My understanding. I used to see things, and I say things very generally, but I used to see things as very kind of like, here's right, here's wrong, or here's how it is and here's how it isn't. And that's just not how I see things anymore. I realize that there's so much nuance. There's so much complexity in every situation with every person.
Right.
You just can't assume anything about anyone because you just don't know the whole story, or you don't have the whole truth of whatever it might be. And so I would say I've become more open-handed with my worldview over the years.
Yeah, noticing and allowing for the gray.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's nuance and complexity to life. So I really get that. And then sometimes I'm having a conversation with someone that hasn't been on the same journey that I've been on. And maybe they are responding to something in what, by my perception, looks like judgmental, or, seeing things in a real concrete, black and white sort of way. And I can internally, I can kind of lose patience in that moment. And in that moment, I have to remind myself, like, Meredith, not everybody's been on the same journey that you've been on, It just, and I think that's interesting when our journeys can inform, our personal life and our professional life. So how has that impacted you both in therapy and in the resources that you provide through the organization?
Yeah. I mean, part of that just kind of directly in the professional field would be that there's not like a right way for a family, a bio kid, a person to have an experience. There's not like, I've even said, I don't want to be the poster child for bio kids. I don't want people to be like, oh, that's what my bio kid should be if they've adjusted well, because the reality is I'm not the story, right? I'm a story in a lot of stories. And so I think that kind of opens that in a way of, there's not one lane, there's not one right answer, there's not one way to do, there's not a magic formula. You're doing your best, whoever you is, right? They're doing their best with what they have. And so how can I provide information so they can make a more informed choice, maybe? But that's kind of the beat of it is there's not a right or a wrong in the place that I stand as a therapist, as a trainer, as a speaker. I'm just providing either a story or I'm providing information, and then people have to decide how that makes sense to them.
So then share with us some of the resources that you have created, the curriculum, the books, like all the things.
So I would say my trainings are probably the most utilized resource. Those are offered in a couple of ways. There's a number of them that are offered live. Those are hosted through organizations. So like, say an agency or a church or something could host it, and it can be done virtually or in person or whatever. And so that's primarily, I've got 9 different trainings, understanding the impact of birth order, encouraging sibling relationships, grief and loss, one kind of around the holidays, one about the impacts of mitigating the impacts of secondary traumatic stress, one on like faith and fostering and how does that come together with bio kids. So I have a number of those that are offered live, and then I also have some now that are offered pre-recorded. Not all of them, but there are some that are offered pre-recorded, so that way it expands the access, hopefully, to those that are able to watch it and get that information. So that's kind of my biggest resource that is available. But I also have like worksheets and like a guide and a couple of free downloads. Like I've made some lists of books that were written for bio kids and an appreciation certificate that parents can give, or I would love if like caseworkers would give, just to say, hey, I see you. Thanks for all that you do to be a sibling to kids in foster care. And so I've made a couple of those kinds of resources as well. And then I do have a children's book called The Day Lily Turned Uninvisible. And it's about a bio kid in a foster adoptive family. But I wrote it in such a way that it's it's applicable to all kids. I've read it in actually a number of elementary schools, and I actually just read it like last week, and I finished reading it, and this one kid says, well, one time I felt invisible when, and that just started an avalanche of, yeah, and I felt like nobody saw me when, and yeah, me too, and when and so these were not kids that were bio kids, but the story resonates with us all because we all know what it's like to feel invisible, whether that's foster adoptive parents, whether, there's a new person that joins work and they're funnier than we are, or whatever it is, we all know what that is like. And so we resonate with the message. So I have that book. I've got some coloring pages too that are free downloads to go along with that. So that's kind of primarily the resources that I currently offer for families through with siblings.
I love that even in that title, of course, we want people to buy the book and we want people to read the whole book. But even in the title, you're giving language to those kids in that circle. You were giving language to them. And then in their own little development and their own families or whatever, even in that circle, they were given the courage and the permission to say, well, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And it turns into, unofficial group therapy for a moment.
Yep.
And that's such a beautiful thing. And not only are you the right person for that in that moment because you're the author and you have the heart behind it, but also you're a social worker, you're a therapist. So you work with kids all the time, you work with families all the time, so you can handle those moments and know how to make sure everybody continues to feel seen and keep the space really safe and trusted.
And part of what I did with the story too was, thinking back to my growing up, the things that I felt, and I felt ashamed for feeling like, oh, these kids, they've ruined everything, or like things were better before they came, or whatever those hard feelings were in those moments, and feeling like that was not allowed. Because sometimes I was scolded for saying it, even in a safe, private space, and I didn't know anybody who had a life like mine or siblings like mine. And so the other piece with the book was giving names to emotions and not making them shameful. So talking about how she felt disappointed, or, she felt empathy. So acknowledging the positive, or maybe not positive, but the more desirable emotions too. So I really tried to give language in the book too for kids and parents so they can see, what am I feeling? And then it's not bad, right? If I can say what I'm feeling, then it's not shameful that I'm feeling it.
Right. And if I have language around that, if I know the words to say and the words that are both honoring to myself and to my siblings, either by adoption or foster or whatever kinship, giving language to that is so big. So we have 5 kids. 4 of them are adopted. And if you're great at math, then you figured out that we have 1 bio kid. And his name is Griffin. He works with us in James Trail. And I know that we as parents get awkward questions and have gotten awkward questions forever since, our first adoption, because of different, interracial adoptions and whatever. And so then people feel the need to ask questions, and sometimes we're ready for them and sometimes we're not. But do the bio kids in these scenarios, do they have language? Do they have a way to feel seen and safe in those moments as well? Because they're not an adult. Like in the grocery store, when people approach me, I'm an adult. I have like a couple of little phrases that I say in ways to try to keep my kids feeling seen and loved. But as a child, if you're 4 or 5 or 8 or 10 or whatever, how do I, as a bio kid, navigate some of that?
Yeah.
So what are some stories of things that you've heard in kids having to navigate some of this?
So I like scripts, like you're kind of alluding to, you had scripts. I like scripts because, and I'll tell parents, it shouldn't be the job of your 7-year-old, 15-year-old to have to come up with that. That is heavy. It's one thing for me as an adult to be able to handle that. It's another thing to put the weight of that on our kid to figure out. And so scripts that are short and easy, things like, that's their story to tell. I'm not comfortable talking about that. If you want to say that, if you can give more information, they could say something like, they're living with us for a while. So, they can, as much information as they're comfortable or your family's comfortable with sharing, but there can absolutely be like little lines like that they can say where it doesn't have to unload the story of the sibling. And it also doesn't have to open up the bio kid or the permanent family members to all the questions either. And they can set a boundary, because otherwise then those friends might keep coming back. And I would say that it's probably even a general rule or a safe rule to say that the older the kids get, they'll probably get more questions from peers. So I'm going to assume that like a 15-year-old is going to get way more questions than like a 7-year-old would about the kids that are living with the family. That's just kind of a general assumption. But we just need to make sure that we are helping our kids to figure out what can they say, what should they say, what's appropriate to say, and making it easy for them so they don't have like a paragraph to memorize or something.
So I love what you just said. In current like foster adopt culture, we think of the kids that were born biologically into the family. We shorten it. We call them bio kids or bio whatever. I mean, truly, every child and every person on the planet is biological, right?
Literally.
And so I heard you just say permanent family members. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I did. It's tricky, the language, right? Because I agree with you. Bio kids, biological kids, birth kids, everyone is all of those things. So it's not necessarily specific, but it is the most accepted and it's the most understood. So that's why that is the language I choose to use. But other people have come back with like, well, that's not really accurate. What about things like one person recommended kept, and I said, well, I don't like that. I don't like kept. These are my kept children. No, thank you. Other people have said things like permanent, which I think is good. Forever is another one that sometimes people use. My hesitancy personally, and even under the guise of with siblings, is I never pretend to speak for someone who's adopted. So sometimes permanent family members or forever family members are people who have been adopted and maybe their family's still fostering or they're adopting another child or whatever. So I'm really careful to be very specific who I'm talking about, because I'm not talking for anyone who's ever been adopted or who has ever been in foster care. So that's kind of why I delineate, and I typically will talk about bio kids or birth kids, because I want to be really specific and not make sure I'm staying in my lane, or at least appearing, to stay in my lane and not crossing into someone else's experiences.
Well, again, I just love the way that you're giving us some language here to work with. And so kind of in that same vein, at times people in other families or at school or outside of, my kids' lives would come to Griffin, our biological kid, and would say things like, well, do you have any real brothers or sisters? And I mean, that is just like a dagger in my heart. And so whenever that would come towards me, I would speak with authority because I'm the parent, right? Like I can say, no, they're all my real kids. They're all whatever. But like, what would you recommend or what would you suggest for, forever family members to respond in that kind of situation?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the age of the kid, but generally speaking, it would depend on like what the situation is too. So like, are they just staying with the family for a short time? So can we just say that? Like, well, they are my real sibling for now. They're just staying with us for a while or something to that effect. But the other thing is, we also don't want to, I'm getting a little bit off track, but I'm staying on track at the same time. We also don't want to assume that bio kids feel like that sibling is their real sibling.
Right, truly.
So there's this push-pull of giving them the freedom to speak how they're feeling. So if they don't want to address that someone used the word real, then not making them feel bad if they don't want to either. But if they do, or if it is a permanent family member, like for example, in my family, my 4 adopted kids are older than my 2 bio kids because my bio kids weren't even born yet when we adopted our oldest 4. So if my bio kids were asked a question like that, and I think my older kids have probably been asked, I know they've been asked questions because of their siblings and our makeup and that sort of thing, then it would be important to give them the language, because otherwise they just don't understand. So things like, I'm trying to think for our kids what they've said. Maybe something like my kids wouldn't have any concept. They would say, well, what do you mean? They are my siblings. So I think that's the other piece too. So the older they are, the more they'll understand. So for an older kid, they could say something like, they're my siblings for a short time. They could say something like, well, they are my real sibling. They could say, we are siblings, if only for a short time. There's just a variety of different one-liners like that I would say families could give to their kids. But biggest thing, though, too, is don't make them feel bad if they don't want to specify that either.
Right. Because to use the metaphor, what is your hill to die on? Meaning what is the most important thing? What is your thing? The hard part is to assume that just because as a parent, I have a strong sense of justice about it and I want to clarify with language and I want to normalize fostering and adoption in the outside world, just because I have all those passions and, I have the adult brain to work with. Lord help us most days, but like, I can't assume that my kid has all of that or needs to have all of that. And so I love that you're just kind of giving permission to just, be a kid. And here's some ideas and some scripts if you want to use them, but also it needs to feel authentic to you, what feels right. And so do you recommend that sometimes parents kind of, role play some of this, think through some of this, have a conversation with their kids that are forever family members, like have those conversations, maybe just one-on-one, to kind of find out from the kiddo, like what feels comfortable here? What do you want to say? Like, let's think about that in advance before the situation happens, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it would be one where you could have collective and individual conversations, because I would think, even, again, I'm just thinking in my family currently, I would kind of see this as being a dinner conversation a little bit of like, hey, what do you guys say if somebody asks you? And maybe opening it up like that and just letting them talk about it. And then we could, well, how do you feel about if somebody says this, or has somebody asked you about this before? And some of those questions I've witnessed, so I know that they have been asked those things. And so I would even think about, is collective maybe less pressure? Now, collective could also mean they don't feel safe to maybe say the thing. So I think individual is important too. And it's important if, like, say you have like certain family members who are permanent family members and then maybe others who aren't. Like, obviously you want to make sure each group is getting the appropriate language for their situation. But yeah, I would say individual or collective, and just giving them ideas, letting them role play. They can practice with each other. Yeah, lots of different ways to do that.
Okay, well, this is all super helpful, and I hope everyone's taking copious notes because this is good stuff here. So I have a really good friend who grew up in a similar situation as you, in that as a child, her family did a lot of fostering, and she had some very specific experiences from that. And so then in coming into adulthood, had a feeling that maybe adoption, and I hope I'm representing the story correctly, but had a feeling that adoption could be a part of their life at some point. But then stepping into that in very real ways had just like a whole different feel to it. And so I wonder if you could speak to some of that. Like, did you always feel like you wanted to adopt? Did you kind of get a little closer to it and you're like, what am I doing? Like, what's happening right now? Or were you like, no, this is what I'm doing. I got to marry someone that wants to do that. Like, well, this is what I'm doing. Like, this is what God's calling me to, or whatever. Like, what was your path there?
My path was that as a child, I was like, yes, we need to do this. Oh, kiddos left. We're ready. We have an open home. We got a call. Yes, they should come. that was my experience growing up. Even though it was hard, it was just like, yeah, we have to do this. But it was not a life that I wanted for my adult years. So I actually said, I'm never fostering. I'm never adopting. I might foster when all my bio kids are grown up, but I'm definitely never adopting. That's like that's a non-negotiable for me. That's off the table. And so to me, the caveat, or it was like a conditional, like, I'll say yes, I'll go be a social worker because I can still serve kids that way. And so I did. And my husband, I would say a couple years before we did start fostering, had said something about it. And I was like, absolutely not. You don't have the baggage I have. You don't have the history I have. You don't know what I know. We're not doing this. And we wait, he waited. We waited. And there was just this one day that I remember I was crying. I called my dad and I said, this doesn't make sense, because I've never wanted to do this. I've never wanted to foster. I've never wanted to adopt. And so the fact that I want to, my heart was stone cold. No one could have changed my heart but the Lord, because it wasn't something I wanted. It was right. And so that was a really pivotal time, a shift for me. Mm. But it's interesting because now as a parent, there's times where I have to remind myself of that moment, times that are really hard. And I'm thinking, I knew this was going to happen, or I wondered about this. I knew, eyes wide open, and here I am. I said I wasn't going to do this. This is why. And I have to remember, like, Daniela, you didn't change your heart. The Lord did. And so if he changed your heart, then he knew you were going to be here, right? And so, so no, it was not planned. It was definitely not what I had anticipated or expected or dreamed or whatever. But again, it goes back to, how can I wish away everything that has made me who I am? Everything. I wouldn't even know the person that I would be. I would be a stranger to myself. I can't imagine who I would be without my experiences growing up, without my experiences in social work, without my experience as a mother to my 6 wonderful children. I wouldn't have any idea who I would be. And so I don't want anything. I don't want to go back. I don't want to change it, because it's who I am.
Well, and who you are is a wonderful thing. So none of us want that to change, certainly negative way. So if you were sitting across from Griffin as an adult, what words of wisdom? Griffin, for our listeners, is our oldest child, and he's a young adult, and he was born biologically to us. So if you had a nugget of wisdom for Griffin in the adult years to say to him, what would you say?
One, it's okay if you need to go to therapy.
I love that.
Because there are times where, for better or worse, bio kids or even parents maybe don't feel like bio kids need therapy or should go to therapy. Like, nothing's really happened to me. It was really my siblings. And so just giving bio kids the freedom, even if you're an adult and even if you're far removed. Sometimes people, whether parents or bio kids, will say, well, we fostered or we adopted when I was like really young. And yet their experiences will still show that it's still with them in ways. And so giving them the freedom to, like, if you need additional support, go ahead and get that additional support. So that'd be kind of my one of my things that I would say. But also, for people of faith, I would invite them to look back and see, where was God in that? Where was he?
Good question.
Whether that's in hard moments, really great moments. That's been something for myself that I've been doing this last year and a half or so, is in those really hard times, being not even in the moment, but looking back and finding where he is. Because sometimes you feel really alone in those moments, and you feel like, I don't know how I made it through that. And then you look back and you realize, oh, that's where he was. So I've always been able to find him. So I would encourage other people of faith to look back to, whether that's a big picture of their life or moments, and see where is God in all of that.
Oh, that's so good. I love all of that. And if you were sitting across from, let's say, little Maria, and she's 7 years old, and her family just welcomed other kid, whatever, into their house, what would you say to little Maria?
I would say, well, it depends on what her experiences are, but
Yeah, no, this is
yeah,
very vague.
yeah, but it's maybe something like, I know that there's been a lot of things that have changed in your family right now, and that can be kind of hard. And I know that maybe you miss your parents, or maybe you feel like people don't notice you the same anymore. Maybe people are like paying a lot of attention to the new kids in your house. That doesn't mean you're not special. They're trying to make sure those other kids feel welcome. But I know it does still hurt sometimes when people forget to acknowledge you too, which is kind of in my book, but it's fine.
Also, by the way.
But yeah, that's those reassurances. I actually last year I was able to go to a retreat for bio kids and able to be a part of that, and it is hosted by an organization of faith. And so I ended my little talks to them. I had a few of them, and one of them I ended with a letter that I believe God would say to them. And I think it's really just beautiful to just, again, I keep bringing it up, but it's just so foundational to everything that I believe and everything that I do, of just this, even when you felt like no one saw you, I did. Even when you felt like your voice didn't matter, I heard you. And so just how can we continue to give that to the kids in our lives, of just reminding them that even on the days when they feel like no one in the world sees what they're doing, somebody knows and is appreciative and sees the sacrifice and sees, what it is that they're doing on the day to day.
Oh my goodness. Okay, everybody, go get your Kleenex box because for all this little teary note, that was beautiful. And this entire podcast message is not just for kids who have been in forever families or kids that have been forever in families. I don't know if I said that correctly, but this is for all of us. We all have moments, seasons, years where we feel unseen and unseen by others, unseen by God. And there was literally never a time in our lives when we haven't been seen and loved by God. So such a wonderful message. And so as we come to the close of our time together, I'm wondering where you see beauty in this season.
Okay, well, it's like we were just saying earlier, it's hard to give tangible words to these kinds of experiences. There are just there are these things that come up, like we'll just say, for example, I'll just give you a couple of really tangible examples. I love to study the Bible. I love to teach the Bible. And so there were these like kind of seemingly random topics, verses, people, passages that kept coming to my mind. And I would say probably about the last year and a half or so that was happening. And I would study it, and I would, kind of put together something about it, and then another one. And then fast forward, 6 months, and all of a sudden, all of the words that I had written were either preparing for something that was actually quite literally happening and I needed it for, or they were speaking to me, but I hadn't known that they were going to be speaking to me 6 months ago when I had written them. So that's kind of a really tangible, like, there's just this thread that, like, I'm being prepared even when I don't know what I'm being prepared for. And I don't even know I'm being prepared. But also just these, I guess what I call God nods, where, like, I was talking to someone on the phone last night and regarding one of my kiddos. And in that moment, the person was talking to me, but I knew in my very heart that the Lord was the one giving me the reassurances that were coming over the phone. It was like, I knew you needed this, so I'm giving this to you. Even though he wasn't saying it, I very clearly heard the person on the phone. I'm not hearing other, right? But so it's those kinds of things, right? I see God in all of those things. When I look back at the hard moments and I see, oh, my mom was with me then. That's where God was in that moment. I had a supportive person with me. Or when I think, oh, God was with me by just this feeling of peace that I had. And so I see God in all of it, wherever he's gracious enough and good enough to reveal himself.
Amen. And I love that your ears are tuned to listen for those things and your eyes are ready to see those things. And that takes work. It takes intentionality. It's a two-way relationship with God. So I love that you are primed and ready for those kinds of moments. And, would definitely encourage our listeners that if you're like, what is she talking about? Like, how do you hear and know and see these things? And I think, Daniela, you would probably agree with me. The more time that you spend with the Lord in prayer and scripture and worship with people in the community of a safe church, then it happens in mysterious ways. Gosh, thank you so much for your time with us today. And you've offered some wonderful just resources right here within, our time together. But also in the show notes, we're going to include all the links to website, social media, book, all the things so that people can stay connected with you. And is there anything else you want to add before we close our time?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess I know how hard it is, right? I know parents are already juggling a lot, foster adoptive parents in particular, and professionals in the field. I know every person who's connected with the child welfare system has a lot, right, that they're doing. And so I know sometimes it can feel like, oh, another thing I have to worry about, another thing I have to keep my eye on. But there's a couple of reasons that this matters, but really the bottom line is the dignity and worth of all of our kids. So whether, someone is, say we've got a caseworker who's got way more kids on their caseload than they should have, but they're in it because they care about kids. Right? I honestly don't know one person who stepped into child welfare who doesn't care about children. And so if we care about children, then that does include bio kids. It doesn't mean that they're more important than kids in care, but it does mean that they are children. They're equally important. They do have inherent worth that is equal to. And so just an encouragement that it doesn't need to be another thing on your plate. And sometimes I think people need the permission to know that it's okay. It's okay to see and support bio kids too. So that would just be my last encouragement for the day, I suppose.
Yes, I love it so much. Well, thank you again for your time here with us. And to our audience, please connect with Daniela and all the cool things that she's doing and that God is doing through her, and connect with those resources and forward them to people that could maybe utilize such resources. To our listeners, we will see you on the trail.